Hi there, welcome to another one of my tutorials. Before I explain what I'm doing in the painting today, I just quickly want to say what canvas size I'm using because I've gotten that question a lot. I usually use the A4 that's already given in the canvas options because of the DPI, which is usually set at 300, which is the minimum requirement for high quality resolution images, and because this has got the color palette sRGB appearance 2.1, I believe, which essentially means that is the color that is most accurately depicted on other devices as well. I have been painting mostly winter landscapes recently and I felt the real urge to create something different, so I thought why not make a tutorial out of it. Personally, I think spring, summer colors are just a lot more easier to me because I've been practicing for a long time. So yeah, that's why. I hope you enjoy this one as well. So once you've got your canvas ready, I'm going in with the hard shading brush of my own set, and you can use any airbrush if you don't have that one in your own library. And I'm going in with like an orangey color for the background. I want to create a forest with very warm colors and a fox kind of situated in the middle of it in like that light surrounding it. I'm using the Gaussian blur in the adjustments tool to blur this out because I'm lazy, but you don't have to do that. It doesn't really matter too much considering we're hiding it in this foliage. And I would also like to say that I'm going to put all the brushes in their order of use down below in a link in a PDF, and I'll also have alternative brushes there for people who use only Procreate original brushes. Fair warning as well here though, that some brushes just aren't, they don't have a counterpart. The texture brush that I'm using here has got a nice one called the old brush and the dry brush. In Procreate you can find those under the painting category, but the reason why I created my own brushes is because they do just kind of help me create what I want more accurately, if that makes sense. Okay, so we've put in the color, put in some of that foliage and evened out the bottom. Then I went in and smudged out with the texture brush to just give it an evened out sort of texture overall. I'm going in on a separate layer with the rectangular hollow brush that I've called a square hollow brush, and I get a lot of comments on that. And I'm just gonna go in and add some very rustic, very rough sort of tree trunks across the painting. I've got 2 in the foreground and then I've got a couple in the background, maybe 4 or 5. I've put these on separate layers because I know when it comes to later, you know, adding texture to them or some sort of detailing, I feel like it's a lot easier to differentiate between the foreground and the background if I have separate layers for me. But of course you can always go ahead and keep all of this on one layer, but you might note that I don't really do that in a more, you know, sensical order, I suppose. Next, I'm choosing the hard shading brush that is round. You can use an airbrush instead, and I'm going to choose some sort of green color. I'm going with very bluish green here to start off with the shadow of the base of the floor, ground kind of thing. And I'm putting this painting layer between the different tree layers. So I've got 2 layers of trees, foreground, background, and I'm putting this here in the middle. And I'm just going to very, very roughly brush in some background for this. Also, this one here that I'm brushing in now is even below the last layer of the trees, which is why you can still see them. I just wanted to have a smoother kind of transition between background and foreground of green, and then I went back to the middle layer and added some more of that dark green. I'm going to be layering several green colors now. This here is a very bright green that I'm going to define where the light falls with and kind of the landscape, the landscape form, so where there are like valleys and drops and hills and stuff like that a little bit. It's all on a very small scale, of course. And then I'm going to go in and add transitional colors in between, like mid-range tones, and I'm also going to make sure that it kind of goes into the background a little bit. I have become used to randomly sometimes pick out these colors because I don't color pick from other images when I used references. It's become more and more intuitive, and if you are trying to learn that, I can only encourage you to do that. You know, like guesstimate where the colors are that you want, and then by trial and error kind of figure out where they are. I will also make a color palette available though for you in the description below that you can use if that helps you to kind of know which colors you're using. Now behind everything, before the background layers with the colors in earlier, I'm going to sketch in with that round shading brush some lighter color for the background, and then a little bit more of that orange darker one that I'm dabbing out now with the texture brush in the smudge option. The aim for me with the background really is to create something where the light can come through and it looks like it's being filtered through a lot of leaves. And because I dabbed it out slightly too much, I added some more of the lighter color in with the texture brush. Now I'll select the layer with the green boundary that I created earlier behind the trees, and I'm going to add a little bit more yellowish type of green into the background with a texture brush that looks like it's just kind of bushes in the background and foliage, you know, on the ground in the background. And because this brush does dab it all out and kind of smooths it all out a little bit, I'm adding some of that darker green back in with the texture brush as well to give that a bit more dimension. Now I will go ahead and clean up my trees a little bit by erasing like the strokes that lie out of the tree, and also making sure that the tree is completely dense in color. Like I don't want to have any streaks that are, you know, where the color is kind of less or the background is showing through. I want it to be really dense, so then I can kind of paint on top of that later properly. I'm using the Define coloring brush here, which is my favorite brushes of all the ones that I've made so far. It really does it's able to paint anything, to be honest, for me, besides maybe the texture of the texture brush, but it just feels very intuitive and smooth to work with, so I can recommend that one. I also use that in the eraser to take away the bits and pieces here. And then using the hard details brush, a very fine one, I'm just going in and adding some branches to all the trees. I'm very conscious here to make sure that I'm working on the exact layer that I want to work on. So for the trees in the background, I'll have the branches on that layer as well for the background, and then for the foreground on the foreground. With the recent snowy landscapes that I've been doing, I have been going out of my comfort zone, and a trick that I've realized in those kind of, while I was painting that, is smudging out the bottom of the trees so that they more naturally go into the ground. Now, because this isn't a snowy landscape, it doesn't look quite the same, but you know, it will be a base to build on eventually. So I'm going to smudge out the bottom of all of those trees. And as you can see, I was painting over the trees in the background a little bit, so I took that grass away that went over it. So what we're doing here essentially is laying all the colors down, getting the idea out. And my idea also included that on the very top I added a new layer and had some foliage coming into the picture from the top, so kind of darker ones, because I wanted them to not be in the light very much. I wanted it to kind of hang over it and kind of cover the scene a little bit, make it feel like it was a little bit more hidden away, I suppose. So I added black in the texture brush and then did a load of detail with the hard details brush, or any fine small brushes you can see here. For the painting to come together more so, I know it's always details, 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 so we're going to start rendering the background trees. By that, I'm essentially creating a clipping layer. Now, if you don't know what that is, I have made a video that I've linked below in the description as well, which hopefully you'll see a pop up on the right as well. But essentially you create a new layer, and then you tap on the layer and you select clipping mask. That's it. And then essentially you can draw on the shape and you won't go outside of the shape that you're drawing on. So I'm going in with a texture brush, and I've chosen a color that's slightly darker than the one of the tree that we used to create the trees in the first place. I'm just going all over and just adding some very random texture. Here again for the foreground, same thing, clipping mask, texture brush, getting a slightly darker color than the tree itself is. This will be our guide for our texture essentially, so we're going to use that by creating another new layer on top of that, and then also making that clipping mask using a round brush, for example, a soft one. Just gonna go in and add our colors. Similarly, when I'm choosing these colors, then I am more or less a little bit intuitive about this. I want to have warm colors for the trees in the foreground, so I'm choosing warmer shadow colors. These are like a reddish or a dark orangey, I suppose. And I'm going in with that soft brush and also making sure that I'm coloring in the branches, because they will stick out against the background, and plus you'll see them a little bit better against everything else then. But as you can see, I'm kind of shading in one side of the tree, you know, particularly where I will have the shadow mostly, which for this tree right now is on the left, and then I'm kind of working from that into the rest of the tree and following the guidelines that we've put down earlier with the texture, following that kind of form and structure, and that will give it a bit more life, I suppose. We're building up like from the shadowy parts until the lighter parts of the tree, and I wanted to keep some of that color that we've added earlier as the base of our trees because I thought that was quite nice. I'm going to go in with a bit of a lighter one and just add bits and pieces of lighter, more vibrant color here and there. When I'm not sure about how to color and texture out tree trunks, I usually go ahead and think about birch trees. You know how they've got that very distinct rind structure to them and shape. So you know how they have like dark circles sometimes and then a lot of light patches, but they still have a lot of like mid-ranges where the shadow comes in and makes the white go grey. So I'm kind of thinking about that when I'm coloring in trees. I don't know if that's helpful to you, but yeah. And even though these aren't birch trees, I do usually think about it anyways, to just kind of make sure I'm not coloring them in all in the same way, but to give them a bit more knobbly bits here and there. Now I am going into the background and doing the same on top of the background trees. Similar process, and I'm trying not to go as dark with them because they are a little bit further back where the light will kind of wash out the color, if you know what I mean. And also here I'm coloring in the brushes a little bit by little bit, but because it's not that harsh, it will just stick out a little bit against the background, which is what I'm looking for. Of course, with like the soft brushes that I'm using here and general air brushes, like you won't get a defined look with it yet, but we will correct that later. Like, you know, I usually go in with a sharper brush and go in and add details with it, and that kind of draws away from that diffused look, I suppose, from that soft washy type look. Otherwise, you know, I usually add texture as well using a texture brush, not the texture brush I have been using, but a different one, for example. We'll get to that later, so don't worry about that for now. Okay, so it is coming together a little bit more now. I'm just going to merge together the layers that I know I won't need anymore, so I'm just merging together all the clipping masks and kind of, you know, cleaning those up a little bit, and then choosing the hard details brush or the define coloring brush. I've chosen the define coloring brush here. I'm going in on the grass layer and I'm going to add loads of details on that now to kind of bring a little bit more life to that. If you have seen my previous tutorials on grass, then this will be a familiar message, but I usually make sure that when you have different color patches overlapping each other, I make sure that grass in each of those two colors overlaps into the other, you know, respective color, because that kind of you know, it doesn't create those harsh boundaries between the different colors, but it adds a bit more of a natural kind of way where, you know, how in real life some grass is going to be hit by the sun regardless if they're in the sunny patch or not, if you know what I mean. Now I am smudging out the colors that I've had before with the define coloring brush in the smudge option, as you can see in the top right, the blue sign, and I'm going in and just making sure that I've diffused out the colors that I've added earlier. This is a great way to shape your landscape again, because it just gives you a little bit more control on where the colors flow to and where your highlights are and whatnot. Obviously the main bit in the middle is all pretty light for me, and I will have a fox in there, which we'll get to now. It's funny when I'm recording the audio and I'm not expecting something so fast, and here we are. So yeah, I've created a new layer and I've added an entire color on it, a color wall, just color filled it. And then I've added a new layer on top of that because now I can actually see what I'm sketching without being like, you know, distracted by the background. Essentially, I've just very roughly sketched out my fox shape, and then I've added a new layer below the sketch and I've put in the color like this. It's like a dark orange one, and now I'm going to merge together the sketch and the color beneath. And while we're on this, I'm going to add some more shadow and some more light before I delete the layer separating this from the actual painting again. I'm just going to put in the shadow and then the light parts of the fur where I know the sun will hit it the most. This will also give you like the opportunity to form the shape of the fox properly, you know, because the sketch was very rough, and that's absolutely fine. And then to the light part, you know how the foxes have got like that white fur just under the chin and that, so I'm kind of orientating myself from reference pictures of a fox, and yeah, just kind of trying very roughly to put in the color and the light. I haven't really painted foxes before, I may think maybe once or twice, so this is also new territory for me, but as usual I'm trying out new things here. As you might have seen recently with the horse painting, that didn't go that well, but this is how we learn, I suppose, huh? So yeah, this is the kind of rough outline, and then once I'm satisfied with the colors, I'm going to delete the color wall between the fox and the painting, and then I'm going to put the fox into the position that I want it to be in the painting properly. I'm using the Define coloring brush for the entire rendering of this fox because it just gives you those nice big chunky blocks of paint if you want them to. And yeah, we're going to use that moving tool on the top left and then just sit it where we want it to be. The fox is very orange, so I decided to go in and change the color, hue and saturation of the background layer itself. And I don't think that's too necessary, to be honest, because as you can see, I've put in the Gaussian blur, I've blurred it out. I'm going to change the color a few times. I'm not entirely sure how I want it to look, so I'm kind of experimenting right now, but you are very welcome to just stick with the color that you've chosen. And yeah, because we'll put in a lot of light later, so it won't actually matter too much as long as it's kind of a warm color. To show you an example, I've created an add layer on top of everything, and I'm brushing in a lot of light to kind of see where I want the light to be later, how it looks with the background. And as you can see, I completely deleted the background because then I thought I don't actually need that. So I've just put in a bit of like a gradient background from orange to light yellow to white with a bit of clouds there, which also I changed my mind with again later, but I'm not deleting all of this because I do want to show you the process of experimenting and figuring your own thing out a little bit. And I'm leaving this for now, and I'm not continuing with that light layer because that was simply to kind of look at it and see what I think about it, if you know what I mean, just kind of experimenting. I'm going in and changing the grass structure around the fox now on a new layer above the fox because I want it to be really nicely nestled into that green around it. And then in the background now, again, I'm going in with a texture brush and adding in a lot of foliage in orange and in red tones in there. I hope this is not too confusing. You're very welcome to just leave the sky background as it was. Like, you know, you don't need to change your mind that often. You can experiment and see how it looks. I always want to encourage that because even with these tutorials, putting your own flair into the painting is, you know, partly the fun, isn't it? So yeah, don't let me confuse you with that. Now with the Define coloring brush, I'm going in again on that top grass layer and I'm going to add grass everywhere around. I'm just going to give the different colors into the background and make sure it looks like the fox is surrounded by a lot of dense, thick, lush grass. Yeah, here's your reminder to keep charging your iPad because my iPad died in the middle of this and I was a little bit worried that it hadn't saved my progress, but it did, so I was lucky. When rendering grass, choosing several different shades always, like keeping, you know, keeping a lot of variety in the green will probably help give a lot more life to it. And then different shapes of grass, like little grass, like very little dots indicating like small plants growing, or small grass, tall grass, that variation will also make a bit of a difference. You can see I've also added some green texture foliage beneath the black layer of foliage that I had earlier, and I'm going in and deleting off that black one more and more, and then also deleting or erasing some of that green one with the texture brush in the eraser, because I want to have a very organic, natural, random shape of foliage, so I went in and changed a few of those. Now I'm also changing the saturation and the darkness of the front trees a little bit, going into adjustments and then tapping on hue, saturation, brightness. You can experiment with those 3 sliders below. You can preview them, cancel them and apply them if you prefer. And I did in the front trees, I did make them darker, but the back trees I was quite happy with. Despite a nice texture on the trees, they are very straight trees. So I'm going in with an eraser and just changing the shape of the outer rind of the trees a little bit, making it a bit more squiggly. And now I will also add more texture to the tree itself. For that, I've essentially duplicated the tree layer that I'm working on and then made the upper tree duplication layer into a clipping mask, and then I've created another new clipping mask above that, and that way you'll stay in the shape of the tree and you can smudge out the colors that you've had before or add new ones. And now I'm going in with a finer brush and adding some dark squiggles, and it's a lot more of a finer brush, so that will take away from that softness that we gave the tree earlier by using a very soft and diffused brush. And then I go in and do the same for the background trees, also duplicating them and making the top layer a clipping mask. Here I didn't really worry too much about making another layer. I just used the top one for this, and then I'm adding some details. And as you can see, these are a lot darker. We can, or I will use like a texture brush in the smudge option in a minute and then diffuse those harsh lines that I'm adding a little bit, and thereby also creating texture. My go-to brush here usually is the stucco brush, which is a Procreate original one, but to be honest, you can use any texture brush to kind of smudge that out if you want to. 2 things before I smudge it out a little bit. I'm going to add some of that light color with the fine pencil on top of those trees to add some bright highlights. And then I'm going to create a new layer on the background trees on top, making that a clipping mask, selecting the stucco brush, and then with the dark black I'm going over it very lightly, very gently, giving it a little bit of texture. As you can see here, these are quite rigid lines, and then going in with that stucco brush to kind of diffuse them out a little bit in the smudge tool will just give me that nice texture without any harsh lines. And then I'll also repeat that for the trees in the foreground. Okay, next I'm creating a clipping layer mask over the fox, and I'm going to choose a texture brush here. I'm choosing the Oberon brush from Procreate itself, which is kind of a very grisly texture, I suppose, and I'm just adding light to where I know the light is going to go. I didn't really like the texture on it, so I went in with a different brush. I'm choosing like the hard details brush or the grainy details brush, and then adding, you know, the different colors and also the facial expression of the fox, which changed a few times as well. I had the expression like this a little bit quite serious in the beginning, and then I ended up changing the eye shape so it looks like the fox is kind of relaxing in the middle of the clearing and just enjoying the sunshine, I hope. Anyways, that was my intention. I do not have any experience with foxes, so I'm sure there are many people better than me out there, and I don't know if I can recommend following me in this, unless you like the outcome, of course. But yeah, that is just a short disclaimer, because I do not have any experience with animals. Okay, now it's time to get serious about the lighting in this picture. I'm going to add a new layer on top of everything, creating an add layer, the add blending mode, and then choosing the hard shading brush. That is just a big round brush for me that is not too diffused on the edges. I'm going to add orange light to everything, and this is quite intense. obviously my camera is distorting it as well, but that usually happens when I press a little bit too hard on the brush and I'm just adding too much light. It overlights everything. I'm going in with the eraser and the smudge brush to kind of create a bit more singled out light rays coming in, and then hopefully diffusing the middle part a little bit more. I have added a new layer on top of the lighting now, where I'm going to add different details. For example, with the fur, having like the white detail where the light is the lightest, and then, you know, on the grass and everything, more and more details will build this up, because this is now kind of the stage I'm usually at. I'm using the grainy details brush here for these flowers that I'm adding everywhere. I do want to make it a really nice like spring look. I feel like with the winter themes, as fun as that's been, I do prefer painting summer and spring. Oh, and here we go. So yeah, I am adding flowers in white, yellow, and then different grass. I am painting all of these details on top of the light layer, because I know if I color pick and then paint beneath the light layer, it will be double saturated, if you know what I mean. You might have done it before, if not, don't worry about it. But yeah, so I'm painting on top of it. This is always my favorite part of the painting, where I can add all the details I want and really make this come to life. I think, you know, personally there is nothing better than details, so yeah, I just go for it and render the F out of it. I will go ahead and add some more details to the foliage above as well, colored details, because some of the leaves are bound to hit the light that is coming through. And off screen, after I finish this painting, which will be done in about 2 minutes video time, I also added, with the same kind of technique, I just added some dabbles of white in the middle of the painting, and I will show you the final result after that in a minute, but it's not much change. That's the only thing really I did. To make this feel a little bit more enclosed as a space, a bit more private for the fox, I wanted to add some more foliage in the background so that the light is kind of coming through that. And I ended up, you know, adding that with a texture brush way below the tree layers and that, like in the background. And then I erased bits and pieces to make it look a little bit more natural. On the add layer where I've been putting on my, where I've added the light rays and that, I'm also adding the fireflies again. When I add the fireflies with the light pen from Procreate onto the add layer, I've noticed that they just become that much brighter and a little bit more like diffuse, so they look bigger, which has always been a nice effect. And I'm adding that everywhere because it is a magical clearing in which the fox is enjoying the sunshine. This concludes the end of the tutorial. I really hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you again here soon. I tried to change things in the tutorial a little bit, considering the recent constructive criticism I've been getting on my previous tutorials. I'm still fairly new, so if you have more comments and feedback, always tell me below in the comments. Feel free to share your artwork on Instagram with me. I've linked all the websites below, and yeah, thank you very much for your support. Have a great day.